There were 2 taps for the ringing of the bell because this is take 2. We apologize for having had some technical difficulties right out of the gate today, as it were. But welcome to First Unitarian Church of Toledo. I'm Reverend T.K. Barger. I'm the senior minister. David Strickler, our commissioned lay minister, will be preaching today. And we welcome you to our congregation. We hope you will continue to tune in, and we appreciate that you bear with us when we do have such glitches as we had at the beginning today. We tried to start the service already, so we're kind of starting over. We're rushing through to catch up. So for the welcome and announcements, I do have a couple of announcements to give. One is, please join us after the service today for coffee hour. You can talk about our glitches if you want, but you can also discuss the sermon, and the Zoom tune-in information should be on the YouTube description. So please do that and join us with coffee hour after. The other announcement is a call for volunteers. As we get into approaching the fall, when we want to do in-person services responsibly, we're going to have religious education again in a slightly different format. Instead of a curriculum, we want it to be a little bit more of playtime this year so the kids can re-bond with their church friends and form different friendships that way. What we need are adult volunteers. So please contact the church office if you would like to work with religious education. And especially right now, we're putting out a call for volunteers for the nursery. We need a nursery coordinator, and we need people to work in the nursery, which would probably be open from 9:30 to 12:30 on Sundays. So that would be a 3-hour shift in which you get to play with babies. So for many of you, that might be a pretty attractive thing. Please do contact the office, and we will have many, many more volunteer opportunities as we start to come back together. And now, as we speed back into place, I'll turn to David for our opening words.
Our opening words today are by Peter Rabel. Water, nurturer of life, sustainer of growth, basic to every living thing. Earth, where every seedling takes root, the ground of our being, our home and our point of outlook. Air, in every breath, we acknowledge the atmosphere wherein we live, the elixir of our existence. Fire, thwarter of cold, light against the darkness, symbol of the burning human spirit. Water, earth, air, fire. These signify the larger unity of all life and the glory of creation wherein our spirits are embraced.
And our chalice is already lit now. David did light it, but we have these words to go with it. In a Unitarian Universalist sanctuary, people sing together. When we light our chalice, everyone focuses on the flame. Yet it is the paraffin of the candle, the cotton of the wick, the potassium chloride and sulfur of the match, and the oxygen in the air around us that makes that flame possible. As leaders, we are not called to be a lone beacon on a hill. Rather, we are meant to work together so that we might together shine. And this is the time in the service when we give our covenant, and then we have congregational singing. But as I say, since we had some glitches, we're speeding ahead. If you have the tune, "Let There Be Light, Let There Be Light," let that be your earwig today, and we will proceed to story time. Today's story is about Joseph Priestley. Have you collected lightning bugs and put them in a glass jar? If so, did you poke holes in the lid to make sure they had fresh air to breathe? Today's story is about Joseph Priestley, who was born in England and became a famous scientist as well as a Unitarian minister. Late in his life, he moved to a new country, the USA. As a child, Joseph Priestley noticed something that would influence the rest of his life. If he kept a bug in a jar for too long, it would stop moving and die. And if he took it out in time, it would resume moving normally. At the time, Joseph Priestley didn't understand why that was true. Nobody did. No one had really studied the air. It was something everyone took for granted. After all, air is invisible. Why would you study nothingness when there was so much to explore in the world that you can see? As an adult, Joseph Priestley resumed his childhood experiments in his basement. He would time how long it took certain bugs or small animals to stop moving if they were trapped under a glass bottle. He learned that nothing survived in that closed environment for very long. He also tried to burn candles in the limited atmosphere and found that they would go out in moments, seeming to burn up whatever kept them going. One day, Joseph Priestley turned his eye to a new living thing. He placed a small mint plant under the glass jar and waited to see how long it would take to run out of air. Joseph Priestley thought it would take days or maybe even a few weeks for the plant to wilt or die. But after several weeks, the plant had only shriveled a little. It was not dead. In fact, it was growing upward still. This observation was very puzzling for Joseph. How had the plant survived? He turned again to his experiments. This time, he placed a candle in the jar with the plant. It would burn much longer than the candles without a plant in the jar. Then Joseph Priestley tried the same experiment with a mouse that he had caught in his kitchen. The mouse lasted a very long time compared with the mouse without the plant. Through these experiments, Joseph Priestley discovered that the air we breathe is not a simple, unchangeable material. It actually consists of a mixture of gases, including oxygen and nitrogen. He wrote several times to his friend Ben Franklin, and together they began thinking about life on Earth and how plants sustain mammal life and vice versa. No one had ever before suspected that trees and other plants took carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and replenished the air with oxygen. In fact, during the time of Joseph Priestley and Ben Franklin, many people thought trees were poisonous. It was considered wise and fashionable to cut down all the trees near your house to clean the air around it. Of course, the opposite is true. Joseph Priestley made several important discoveries in his lifetime. In today's story, we learned about a very important discovery that he made by accident. Joseph Priestley was looking for the reason that living things used up air. But what he found instead was that plants create oxygen from the carbon dioxide that we exhale. One of the most important discoveries in history.
This is our time for meditation, contemplation, and prayer. This is a time to find a comfortable position to sit and breathe. Some of us will sit with our concerns, our concern for family and friends, our concerns for our congregational family and church friends, our concerns for those dealing with health issues. Some of us may sit with gratitude, our gratitude for what others have done for us, our gratitudes for what we are able to do, our gratitude for connections in this faith community. This is the time to sit and breathe. Reverend Matt Alspaugh wrote these words: "Breathe with me. Breathe with me the breath of life. Inhale, inspire, inspiration. Ruach, pneuma, spiritus, the Holy Spirit, the many names for breath. Breathe with me. Know that with each breath we take in molecules of air that were breathed by every person that ever lived. Breathe with me and breathe the breath of Jesus, of Moses, of Muhammad, of the Buddha. Breathe with me and know that we are all interdependent, that the Spirit of life flows through us all. Breathe with me as we come together to do the holy work of interconnection and relationship, that our work here may be blessed."
Spirit of life, come to me, sing in my heart all the strength of compassion. Rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Rose of heroes, wings set free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Who holds patents, gives us a story about effervescent chemistry and fiery theology. I have a reading by the Reverend Scott Prinster titled "Seeing Joseph Priestley Whole." We are a species that looks at nature and sees patterns and meaning. From the perceived order, we have come to interpret the world both scientifically and metaphorically, producing a variety of scientific disciplines on the one hand, and theology and faith on the other. This distinctively human impulse to see both regularity and poetry in the universe presents us with a potential dilemma. Is one of these perspectives truer than the other? Or do they both contain some share of truth? The story of Joseph Priestley is an excellent illustration of what is sacrificed when the search for knowledge is polarized in this way. The prolific English Unitarian minister, philosopher, scientist, and historian deliberately cultivated a broad and enthusiastic curiosity about the nature of the world and humanity's place in it. Priestley is generally remembered among American Unitarian Universalists as the discoverer of oxygen and soda water, who incidentally happened to be a Unitarian clergy member, and came to the United States after his home and papers were burned in political riots. However, our English Unitarian kin remember him as one of their founders and have a fuller sense of his accomplishments, especially how central his religious identity and political views were to his scientific legacy.
According to the label on this bottle, which I'll hold up for you to see, it contains naturally carbonated water from a spring. For this refreshing beverage, we should give thanks to the creator and sustainer of all life, which some call God and others call nature. This can contains carbonated water as well. For this drink, we should give thanks to a mere human, a natural philosopher, a heretic, a Unitarian minister named Joseph Priestley. Today, I want to talk about Priestley's scientific achievements and his views on religion and how these interests overlapped in his life. For you see, Priestley believed that a gracious and loving God provided everything required to sustain us. His religious faith inspired Priestley to investigate the world around him in order to understand God's benevolence and providence. Joseph Priestley was born in 1733 in a small Yorkshire village in the mid-north of England. His father and grandfather had a cottage industry as finishers of the woven wool cloth produced in the region. Joseph was a theological prodigy, as he could recite the Presbyterian Catechism at the age of 5. Sadly, his mother, Mary Priestley, died when he was 7 years old. He was sent to live with his Aunt Sarah, while his younger siblings remained with his father. Joseph continued to do well in his studies, which was good, because Aunt Sarah had high expectations for him. And as a Calvinist, she was more strict than his Presbyterian parents. At the age of 16, he contracted the consumption and nearly died. The cause was blamed on bad air, but the modern diagnosis is pulmonary tuberculosis caused by a bacterial infection. His brother Timothy later noted that Joseph's first interest in science occurred as he struggled for life. After recovering, Joseph decided to attend college in hopes of entering medicine or ministry. In gratitude to Aunt Sarah for nursing him through his illness, he decided to become a church member, which was more difficult than simply signing a book. In order to be admitted to Holy Communion, he was interviewed by a panel of elders. He easily answered the questions related to the 10 Articles of Calvinism, but he struggled on 2 other points. First, he expressed an unsound opinion on the question of original sin. And secondly, He had not had a convincing experience, that is, the conversion that came from a direct visitation by God. After the interrogation, the church elders found him not to be quite orthodox, so they refused him membership in his childhood church. And by doing so, they indicated that, in their view, he was predestined for eternal damnation. The 19-year-old Joseph was devastated and angry. In response, he rejected Calvinism and declared his acceptance of Arianism, the doctrine that Jesus was created by God and was therefore different from God the Father, not co-equal with God. Arianism dates back to around the year 300 and was a precursor to Unitarianism. Joseph's college options were limited by the sectarian restrictions in 18th century England. His parents and aunt and uncle were all dissenters, which was a catch-all phrase for Protestants who refused to conform or submit to the Church of England's 39 Articles of Faith. Presbyterians, Calvinists, and Puritans were all dissenters. Quakers, Catholics, and Jews were also lumped into this segregated group, but subjected to even harsher treatment. Dissenters could not hold public office, serve in the Army or Navy, or attend public universities. Thus, Cambridge and Oxford were not options for Joseph. Moreover, his rejection by his church elders meant that he could not attend the Calvinist colleges. Surprisingly, the minister of the church that rejected him saw potential in Joseph and encouraged him to attend the liberal academy at Daventry. Priestley thrived there, and his theology shifted further leftward until he became a so-called rational dissenter. That is, one who believed that Christianity and faith could be dissected and evaluated using the newly emerging discipline of science, thereby leading to a stronger belief in God. After finishing university, he moved around England a bit. He left his first position as an assistant pastor because the congregants complained that he was an Arian and a furious free thinker. His second ministerial position turned out to be a good fit. He left the ministry when he received a better offer to be a lecturer at the liberal Warrington Academy. At Warrington, he wed Mary Wilkinson, and they had their first child, Sally. Joseph and Mary left Warrington due to concern about Sally's poor health, and Priestley wondered whether bad airs from the nearby Mersey River were contributing to her symptoms. His new position was at a chapel in Leeds. Although their new house was on a quiet road, there was a public brewery behind the house. Other ministers might have railed at this wellspring of public intoxication, but Priestley was intrigued by those bubbling vats of liquid. He asked the workmen if he could try some experiments, and they agreed to accommodate this quirky neighbor. When he floated burning chips of wood on the surface of the fermenting liquid, the flames were extinguished. Despite the warnings of the brewers, Joseph tried to breathe the airs coming from the vats. His lungs were stifled, and he felt lightheaded. He placed butterflies, insects, and a mouse in the gas, and they grew torpid and fell over, but revived if he took them out quickly enough. He tried several different methods to mix the brewer's air with water. The water acquired a pleasant tart taste. When he offered a taste to the brewers, they responded favorably. He wondered how it might compare to the medicinal spring waters that bubbled out of the ground at the well-known spas in Piedmont and Selters, Germany. His method for impregnating water with fixed air could have been dismissed as a novelty, but he knew that the Royal Navy was desperate to find a way to prevent scurvy. Sour fruits like lemons and limes were effective, but they spoiled on long voyages. Sour liquids like vinegar were also somewhat effective, but not palatable. So he speculated that this new tart water might be effective. The Royal Navy tested his windy water on several vessels, but it did not have the desired benefit. Nevertheless, he published his work, which enhanced his reputation as a careful observer and a clever experimentalist. Priestley went on to isolate half a dozen other gases during his life, including dephlogisticated air, which had two significant properties. It caused the candle to burn brighter than normal, and it revived his test mice even faster than regular air. This second point had moral importance to him. If it was true that human and animal respiration injured the air, then what provision had God made to restore the goodness of air? However, he tried to interpret his results based on the phlogiston theory, which turned out to be awkward and unconvincing. So the French savant Antoine Lavoisier read Priestley's papers, met him briefly. Lavoisier repeated Priestley's experiments, extended them with additional studies, and developed a simpler theory to explain the results. Lavoisier renamed the gas oxygen, and his new theory of combustion and respiration became the basis for modern chemistry. The profession of scientist was not established until decades after Priestley died. Most people that engaged in scientific endeavors were learned amateurs, often gentlemen of wealth, sometimes professionals with other day jobs. Thus, Priestley considered himself a theologian, a teacher, and a reformer. His role as a natural philosopher was a hobby. During his lifetime, he published over 150 articles, books, discourses, and essays. Around age 40, he published his first major theological treatise in 3 heavy volumes entitled Institutes of Natural and Revealed Religion. He asserted that God's existence, as well as his goodness and providence, could be established by reason. He focused especially on God's benevolence because human benevolence is limited. Priestley maintained that everyone should take the sacrament regularly, but he argued that many trappings of contemporary Christianity were corruptions of Jesus' teaching by the early church in its struggle for ascendancy. In particular, he objected to the deification of Jesus and the Virgin Mary, the beliefs in immortality and the soul, and the doctrine of the Trinity. He also ventured into politics by stating that dissenters should have the same rights as Anglicans. 8 years later, his next major work, History of the Corruptions of Christianity, created alarm. Once again, he attacked key Christian doctrines such as predestination and atonement, because these concepts were at odds with the views of the early Christian church. He reiterated that the greatest corruption of all was the concept of the Trinity. His claim that Jesus was human like us led to accusations that he encouraged skepticism and atheism. In 1785, he made his biggest rhetorical mistake by using an extremely provocative metaphor referring to the failed gunpowder plot of the previous century. In 1605, Guy Fawkes and his Catholic conspirators had attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament because of the harsh laws against practicing Catholics. 180 years later, on the same date, Priestley delivered a sermon claiming that Unitarianism was gaining ground every day. He said, "We are, as it were, laying gunpowder, grain by grain, under the old building of error and superstition, which a single spark may hereafter inflame, so as to produce an instantaneous explosion, in consequence of which that edifice may be overturned in a moment. When the French Revolution kicked off 5 years later, many feared that radical politics and mob rule would spread to England. In the northern factory cities, there was a deeply conservative movement that wished for a return to the golden age, where all was safely ordered and everyone cared for by the church and king. In Birmingham, where Priestley lived now, a mob of reactionaries assembled to harass a meeting of liberals. The church and king mob initiated a 3-day riot of looting and vandalism, attacking 4 dissenting churches and 27 homes. Priestley's calls for political change and his infamous gunpowder sermon resulted in the mob burning both his meeting house and his home. Priestley and his family initially fled to London and emigrated to Pennsylvania within a year. He spent the last decade of his life in Pennsylvania, where he played a key role in establishing a Unitarian church in Philadelphia, the second Unitarian church in the U.S. after King's Chapel in Boston. He continued corresponding with prominent and influential Americans such as John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. For example, Jefferson conversed with Priestley about the tenets of Unitarianism. He had read the old man's Corruption of Christianity and said that he used the book as the basis of his own personal faith. Priestley was so touched by the attention that he dedicated his last book, Jesus and Socrates Compared, to Jefferson. In 1804, Priestley died quietly in his Pennsylvania home. We might look back at Priestley's life and feel triumphant about the progress we have made since the 18th century. Progress in chemistry, theology, and religious liberty. However, we face issues today that are just as challenging as those addressed by Priestley. He and Lavoisier struggled to understand the role of an invisible substance that surrounds us and that is essential for life. 200 years after their work on oxygen, Vera Rubin, an astronomer at the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C., found evidence for an invisible, ubiquitous material permeating the universe. She had determined that the velocity of stars and spiral galaxies was inconsistent with the amount of visible mass in those galaxies. In order to resolve this discrepancy, Dr. Rubin hypothesized there must be additional unseen mass exerting gravitational pull. Modern astrophysicists now estimate that this dark matter comprises 84% of the material in the universe. I suspect that in some future era, our term dark matter will sound just as archaic as fixed air or dephlogisticated air. The competition between religious organizations and governments for power and control is evident today as well. Conservative pundits cherry pick from the writings of Ben Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson to convince their base that the U.S. was founded as a Christian nation. Such selective reading is a corruption of the founders' beliefs. In June, the United States Conference of Bishops debated whether to withhold communion from Roman Catholic politicians, such as our president, who support pro-choice policies. This sounds similar to me to Priestley's early experience. In Tennessee, the ACLU had to file a lawsuit against the Smith County school system to stop school-directed prayer during mandatory assemblies. I started this sermon by stating that we should give thanks to the Creator for this naturally carbonated spring water. However, I conveniently overlooked the fine print This bottled water is not carbonated naturally. At one time, Gerolstein, Perrier, and other purveyors bottled carbonated water directly from the spring. However, they now pasteurize the water before bottling to kill any harmful microbes. This high-temperature process also drives out the dissolved carbon dioxide. So they re-impregnate the water using CO2 from the same natural outlet. And remember those brewers that Priestley worked with? They would be surprised to learn that the vast majority of American beers are processed the same way. After brewing, the beer contains tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide. To increase the shelf life, the beer is then pasteurized to remove undesirable microbes, and then recarbonated thanks to Priestley's work. So the next time you have a sparkling water or a soda pop or a beer in your hand, consider offering a toast or two. A toast to those who make careful observations. A toast to those who speak up for true religious liberty. A toast to those who have advocated for the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And a toast to that effervescent chemist and fiery theologian, Joseph Priestley. Blessed be, and amen.
Amen, and cheers to you,
Cheers.
David.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank Joseph Priestley. Now it's our offering time. As we are in our time of separation because of the pandemic, we're still requesting that you give as you can, either online through uutoledo.org. You can click on Give there and follow the instructions and give, or you can do it the old-fashioned way and send a check in the mail. Those all are worthy ways to give, and we appreciate your support of this congregation. Coming soon for next week's Sunday service, our speaker will be Colette Cordova, and she will be speaking on widening the circle of concern, belonging. We look forward to having Colette, one of our lay members, giving the sermon then. Again, join us after the service today for coffee hour as well. Check YouTube for the Zoom connection information. And perhaps you might talk about Joseph Priestley while drinking a carbonated beverage. That is a valid thing to do. And we are not having the Spiritual Adventures Forum, our usually Sunday 10 o'clock time for adult religious education this month. Instead, we're asking you to take part in coffee hour for that. So that is it for today, and we get to our closing words, which I'm not finding on my script.
The closing words are from Susan Carlson, blessed by our connections. We leave blessed by our connections to one another, to the Spirit of life. Walk lightly that you see the life that is below your feet. Spread your arms as if you had wings and could dance through the air. Feel the joy of breath in your lungs and the fire in your heart. Live to love and be a blessing on this earth.
And as David uses science to extinguish the chalice, I share The Work We Share by Krista Tavis. It is our work shared with each other in covenant that creates and sustains this beloved community. We extinguish this chalice, but its light lives on in the directions we have chosen today. The light of this faith lives on in us, together, in our hearts, minds, bodies, and spirits. Amen, and blessed be.